Well, first, Mai, good afternoon. It's Friday, the final Mannin line of the week, an open line. Beth looking after things for Andy. Just for today, he'll be back on Monday. We would love to hear from you about anything on your mind this lunchtime. 66 13 68. Great, the switchboard has already lit up. We'll come to those callers in just a moment. Some of the things you might be thinking about. We have now heard from the Health Minister ahead of the doctors' strike on Ireland next week. She insists our healthcare system is not at crisis point. Do you agree? And what about that report released today telling us government has grown by 427 full-time equivalents, most of those, 408, located within Manx Care? Any thoughts on that? As I say, 66 13 68 is the number. You can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com. We're on WhatsApp as well, 07624 166 177, and then you'll be able to message us for free. Very quickly first, I just want to mention Ramsey Beach. We've heard a few people talking about the fact it's not very often cleaned. We were in touch with Ramsey commissioners, as promised, to ask about how often it is cleaned. And they tell us, obviously, it's January, it's storm season, and not that many people tend to use the beach in January, and those that do, they say, will understand the natural landscape of a beach. So hopefully that goes some way to explaining. I know some people were saying it was cleared before the New Year's Day dip, but I suppose that makes sense if lots of people were anticipated to use it. We're going to go straight to the lines, as I say, and join Bonzo now. And Bonzo, I think it's fair to say you are one of our regular callers, a very welcome regular caller here on Manx Radio, but you've got some comments about some of the comments made to you about that.
Well, I haven't heard of the comments there because I wasn't listening to Wednesday's programme. Yes, if you don't like what I have to say, if you don't like the sound of my voice, well, you can always listen to the sound of your own voice by phoning into 66 13 68. Sorry, 63 13 68, and talking to you or Andy Wind. So other people can listen to the sound of your voice and say how much they don't like it.
I think it's difficult, isn't it, Bonzo? Because, it takes a little bit of courage sometimes, I think, to pick up the phone and put your head above the parapet when it comes to certain issues. But I guess, what is it that you get out of calling the Mannin line, I suppose, from your own personal experience?
Pain, mostly. Abuse. No. Well, what I do, or what I try to do anyway, is that, firstly, I don't phone in all the time. And secondly, what I try to do is add to the public debate on various things, as they come up, and also perhaps put a rebuttal fact check on the comments of others sometimes who phone in. So, it's not all about me loving the sound of my own voice, which I think some people have sort of some strange idea that you do. I mean, also, of course, public forum like this it's going to be by necessity sometimes the debate is going to be robust. Yes, that may discourage some people, and I think obviously that's something that perhaps Mannin Line needs to work on. But it's part of the necessary debate, and politics could do, I think, with a little more robust debate rather than just platitudes and following on from what is the accepted wisdom.
All right, Bonzo. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to call in today. As I say, we've got a full switchboard, which is always great to see. So we are going to move on, but good to talk to you as ever.
Okay, take care. Bye.
All right, take care. That was Bonzo there. Let's go to line 2 and join Brian now. Good afternoon, Brian.
Good afternoon. Let me just start by saying to Bonzo, I might not always agree with his opinions or anything he's got to say, but he's perfectly entitled to them, and he's perfectly entitled to voice them, as everybody is. So power to your elbow. Secondly, Ramsey Beach. Yeah, please don't clean up Ramsey Beach. Leave it. They've been cleaning Douglas Beach for donkey's years, and all they do is turn the sand over, bring the small particles to the surface, which wash away on the next tide, and that's why we've got a horrible beach in Douglas. But that wasn't why I phoned.
Okay.
My son has just bought a house with his girlfriend. £250,000, and that's horrendous to get young people started. And MHKs are always crying, we need to do something for the young people. Well, he's been down to his advocates this morning, and he's had a quotation for the conveyancing. Now, when you get a quote for almost £10,000, I'll repeat in case you missed it, £10,000 to convey a small property, you've got to ask, where's that money going? Well, the advocates take a fair chunk, but the lion's share of it is the registration fee, which has elements in there now that penalise certain sectors of the community. So, do we have a communist government now? Now, the government that we have is totally inept at controlling costs. Whilst I was waiting to come here, I heard comments about Manx Care. Well, hang on a minute. That was totally controlled. The Isle of Man Health Service was controlled by our MHKs, but they wanted to step away from that, so they handed that over to a whole raft of individuals so they can step back now and say, not my fault. Well, okay, if you're going to divest yourself of the responsibility, and bear in mind that that's over 90% of our expenditure, which they're not controlling as such anymore, why don't they divest themselves of that burden, i.e. their salaries in Tynwald? If they're not doing the work, why are we paying them for it? Now, I'm looking at Onken in macro, but it's reflected island-wide throughout government. I have not heard during any of the debates that I've listened to, and I listened to quite a few, and I read the transcript from those minutes.
Sorry, Brian, I'm just going to interrupt you only because I'm struggling to hear some of what you're saying there. I don't know whether maybe you move, whether your signal isn't brilliant where you are.
Okay. I'm just saying, Onken commissioners, I have not heard. Can you hear me?
I can hear you better now, yeah.
All right. I cannot believe that they've gone this full term and not spoken, apart from Anthony Allen, I tell a lie, he did raise this subject, about cutting costs and looking at keeping the rate down by saving money. Now, again, 4.5%, they're ahead of inflation. We've had a series of increases recently in local authority housing rents ahead of inflation. And this is all to fund £100 million sea terminal thing in Liverpool. Well, for the first their operation.
Oh, Brian, sorry, I'm completely losing you again now. I wonder whether maybe you might be able to just go and see if you can find somewhere else where maybe you'll be able to get a little bit of a better signal, because I'm really sorry, we're struggling to hear there. Hopefully we'll come back to Brian in just a moment. In the meantime, let's join Howard on line 3. Good afternoon, Howard.
Good afternoon, Beth. I've been looking and listening to your news about the government has grown by X number of jobs over the past 4 years, 427. But in one line, the majority of those roles, 408, which is virtually the full amount that is grown by, are located within Manx Care. Now, that's a very simplistic assumption, and it doesn't give any detail. So next week, Claire Christian is going to be giving a talk or in Parliament about various aspects of Manx Care, and then she's saying how they're not overspent or they're within their bounds. But can she ask a question? Can she answer a question? What are the percentages of that 408 total are on frontline care, and what the percentage is for managerial posts. And the managerial posts will obviously be pensionable. They'll be a salary that is exceeding what the front line, the nurses, etc., will be receiving. So can she give a full breakdown of what the totals are, the numbers, between the nursing staff, the frontline caring staff, to office workers? Are there any diversity workers there? Are there any specific jobs that are non-jobs? Let's have a breakdown of it so the people of the island who are paying this will know what the situation is. That's a very poor, there's about 10 words. The majority of these roles, 408 out of the 427, are located within Manx Care, and it doesn't give any specifics. So can the question be answered next week, or Claire Christian come on, and then she'd probably say, well, I don't know because we don't have that information, and that information is not available, and we're not allowed to give it out even if we did have it. So let's have some answers, because it's the taxpayers' money that's paying these 408 people. Good, all power to their elbow if they're frontline staff. If they're taking on managerial staff, administrative staff, over the number of frontline staff, then we want to know the reasons why.
All right, Howard. Again, I'll just remind everyone that we have asked to speak to the CEO of Manx Care this week, largely to do with the doctor strike, which is due to start next Wednesday. But I think, this is a question that we would be asking about exactly where these jobs are. But I suppose, just to be fair, though, if you did away with all the admin staff, I'm not sure how good a shape things would be in then.
Well, there's so many people in there that for many, many years, even before Manx Care came along, my wife and I used to refer to it as Noah's Ark, because the people walking around with a sheet of paper under their arms, it 2 by 2, and they seem to be just heading all different directions. Nobody seemed to have anywhere. And like the old story in the army, if you carry a piece of paper around with you, you can walk around all day and nobody will question you.
I'm going to get myself a piece of paper, Howard.
On the managerial side.
All right, Howard, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you as ever. We're going to move on because, as I say, we've got quite a few people on the lines, which is great. Let's go back to line one and hopefully Brian, and hopefully I'll be able to hear you a little bit better now. Sorry about that, Brian.
That's all right. The vagaries of Manx Telecom are hitting me there. They want to put me off air.
No.
No. Summarising what I'm saying, £10,000 to convey a property. That's ridiculous. £1 now to send a letter to the UK. Did you know that? £1.
But that's because, Brian, people are sending fewer letters.
Now, that's because they've just had a whole raft of new vans and they have no ability to manage their business. Don't sit back whinging that the market has changed and now we're losing money. Get out there and do what anybody in the private sector would do, sort out how you can make a profit again. And the best way is cut your costs. And we've got this throughout government. We're spiralling out of control, squandering money on grandiose schemes, sometimes ridiculous schemes, totally uncontrolled, and we're moving it from department to department so nobody takes responsibility. Look, £400 million on the power station some years ago, and then we have the Iris scheme. What a lemon that's turning out to be. And an energy from waste plant. And this terminal in Liverpool, budgeted 20 and up to 100. And then what about the roundhouse? Oh, 10 million? They've gone through 10 million. Thought it was going to be 4. Onken commissioners are going up and up and up every year with their rates.
OK, I'm going to take your point there, Brian, but the the reality of the situation is that we can say that we need to cut costs, and absolutely there are undoubtedly savings that could be made, but that have to come with that unpopular decision. So you mentioned Isle of Man Post, but no, you mentioned Isle of Man Post,
yes.
And a little while ago they cut their Saturday deliveries as an example to try and cut costs, but then people don't like that either. So, there really has to be a little bit of give and take and an understanding, surely, of the broader situation. We can't have it every which way.
No, you're missing the point completely. Right, you've never worked in the private sector, obviously. If you take an interest in Post, there's an Indian wants to take over the Royal Mail in the United Kingdom, and sacrosanct.
I'm not sure whether that's relevant about where they're from.
The Saturday delivery is to be kept because that's part of the Royal Charter. With responsibility for a business, you have to be responsible in providing the service. If you can't provide the service, you can't make the charge. Now, yes, you do have to look at cutting back, but not necessarily at the areas that you're talking about. You don't cut back on the service first.
So where would you cut back then, Brian?
Well, I've run several businesses. And very successfully. If you want to talk to me about my successes in business, I can go on all day here, because I've been able to make money, and we don't do that by cutting back.
Okay, but
Sadly,
sorry, this is just an interesting debate, isn't it? But then again, you don't do it by cutting back, but we're expecting government, and we want government to cut back. So I guess I'm just asking, where should those cuts be then?
Where you've got wastage, where you've got total unnecessary wastage, and you need to be on top of that all the time, which brings me back to my point that during this term in office, with the exception of Anthony Allen, no other commissioner has said, have we got any wastage, and where can we cut back to save the ratepayers money? You just keep going and say, well, it's cost us this much, so they'll have to pay more. Well, that doesn't work. If you start charging £1,000 for an ice cream cone, you're not going to sell any. The private sector is governed by what the market will stand. Prices are regulated by the customer. They get to a point where they won't pay for it anymore. In government, they just have to pay, so they don't actually try to control their costs. A business that doesn't control its costs goes out of business on every occasion.
All right, Brian.
And you're looking, whether you like it or not, you're looking at the final death throes of Isle of Man Post and the health service. Now, where are the cutbacks in the health service? Well, in dentistry, I haven't had one of those for half of my life. I've lost it about 3 years ago, and I still can't get one back. What the heck is going on? I had a contract. I paid into a service for all of my life, 73 years I've achieved so far, and can't get a blooming dentist.
But I suppose then again, Brian, people would say, you talked about being a great business person, unfortunately being able to make money, and there will be people who think, well, if you can pay for services like dentistry, then that's what people in that position should do.
That's exactly what they're doing. And young people should pay £10,000 for a conveyance because they're buying a house. Come on, that's just bizarre. If you enter into a legal contract, and that's what the National Health Service was all about, you enter into a legally binding contract, then abide to it. Okay, if you have to trim in areas and you have to do other things and turn off certain facilities within the health service, then fine. But you've got to make it so that it complies with the original concept. Now, my mother, unfortunately for her, she bought herself a house. And when she went into a care home, she had to pay in the final years of her life over £250,000 to be looked after. 50% of the people in there don't pay. They're paid for by government. That's a penalty on her because she worked. So here's my advice to every young person that's thinking of buying a house. Forget it. Get into a local authority one. You'll get a sponsored rent. You won't have to pay for any of the maintenance or any of the problems. You won't have to insure the structure of the building or be out there in all weathers trying to put your fences up and all the rest of it. And at the end of it all, you'll be able to spend all your money and still get the same facilities as these suckers that have bought houses, worked all their life on them, and then have them taken off them because they've been workers. It's a communist government we've got.
All right, Brian, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for phoning back. We really appreciate it. A lot of strong opinions there, which as ever we do welcome here on the Mannin line. 66 13 68 is the number to call if you'd like to have a quick chat on air before 1 o'clock. We'll just take a quick break now. You're listening to the Mannin line here on Manx Radio. It's just gone 12:30. Beth looking after things for Andy just for today. He will be back on Monday. Chris is on the phone, so if you'd like to have a quick chat on air, we'd love to hear from you. 66 13 68 is the number to call. You can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com. We're also on WhatsApp as well. 07624 166 177, and then you can message us for free. OK, let's go through some of the texts and emails that we have received over the past half hour or so. Texter ending 350 says, I've just been to Barclays Bank in Douglas and told there will only be one person taking money into accounts or paying bills. They want you to do everything by machine and you must have a card. I don't quite understand that the last sentence there is something about stopping paying at post offices, but I take your point there that you've made about going into that branch in Douglas. Dave says, if there's a shortage of nurses, doctors, consultants, GPs and dentists, etc., how come Manx Care has increased their staff numbers by more than 400? If they had full numbers, what would the wage bill be and how much would they be over budget? Again, as I say, these are questions when we can speak to Manx Care that we will ask them. Daphne has been in touch to say the only problem with regular callers is that sometimes they tend to take over the programme. But as I say, if we've got lots of people waiting, we will move things along. Ali says, I think it's unfair stating Bonzo likes the sound of his own voice. This complaint could also be levelled at other regulars, but then there would be no moan-in line. I'd suggest that Bonzo has in the past decried a couple of the contributors' comments, and that's not really acceptable. By all means, have your say, but have the good grace to let others have theirs. Well said, Ali. The worst contributor for some attacks is Bonzo. The list is endless, but one that sticks in the mind is calling Julian a misogynist for daring to question one of the MHKs in Garth. That's texter ending 380. Who fact checks Bonzo's fact checks, says Des. With the figures, says texter ending 810, that government has grown, it's quite damning as it only seems to be going on underachieving departments. I was talking to someone from DOI Highways who stated their workforce had been cut from over 200 manual workers to under 70, but they are expected to carry out the same level of service and all they get is criticism. It begs the question, who is identifying where the island needs supporting? Bring on the election. And I think as ever, it's something that we are quite conscious of, is that when departments like the DOI are criticised, you know, it's felt by everybody, isn't it? It's not just necessarily the people that you are necessarily levelling it at, the people that you believe are just sitting in the offices not doing the great deal. That might be an opinion that some people have, but it is felt by everybody, and including those people who, as we know, particularly in the horrible weather that we've had over the past few weeks, are out there on the front line. Roger says, I agree with Brian over the post office. They have replaced a fleet of vehicles with electric vans at high cost, which they then have had to increase postage fees to cover this decision. The parcel deliveries, though, are making money, says Roger. That is according to Roger. Something we probably need to speak to the post office about. Texter ending 616 says, government's not there to make money. Its function is to provide public services. These come at a cost. The more we expect, the more it will cost. Simple. Des says, it's easy to spend other people's money. I'm an expert at that, so if you need any advice, call me. Roger wants to know why Manx Care needed another 400 posts and how they got approved by the minister. Someone will need to have justified the increase in headcount, so can we see this reasoning by a Freedom of Information request? Caroline has been in touch to say contributors to the Mannin line do nothing but complain about all aspects of living on the island. They don't realise how lucky they are. This is a fantastic place to live, she says. Granted, it's not perfect, but far better than living across. There is a boat in the morning for those who are so unhappy. Please stop boring the listeners with constant whinging. Carol says, well said, Brian. And Des says, I take offence about being called a sucker. Texter ending 902 says, I agree with Brian, you're worse off by working, but there are ways around not paying £250,000. Well said, Brian, says texter ending 885. The Emperor's new clothes come into mind with regards to this government. It's communism hidden in plain sight. Texter 009 wants to know if the managers at Nobles go round and supervise the services they're paying for. Clinical waste, for example, they pay the same for removal of half-filled bins, even with a bin with one bin bag in it. Are lights left on in departments not in use, asks Liz. Manx Radio as Manx as a censored comment on Mannin line. Thank you very much. And Jennifer Rush, The Power of Love. I don't think that is for us just now. Brian is absolutely right, says Nick. It's not fair for those of us that work hard and buy a house. Furthermore, Isle of Man Post could reduce spending by not changing their whole fleet of ICE vehicles to twice the cost of EVs. Bonzo offers a sensible voice of reason, in my opinion, says Steve, and is one of the few who regularly calls out the constant misinformation and scaremongering that's broadcast by certain contributors. Please continue to do so, Bonzo. It's very noticeable, says Steve. Regarding the claim of claiming the UK Post Office is considering selling it, he's actually a Czech billionaire, says Julian in Port St Mary. And there's a message here from texter ending 553 on WhatsApp who says, I don't want to say my mum's name, but she had an urgent referral in October at Nobles Hospital. She's not even had one appointment through yet, and it's awful watching her suffering. I wouldn't let my dog suffer the way she has. And this texter says, Manx care, no care. Again, I'll probably say in this situation, there is also MCALs that you can get in touch with if you have got concerns about the care that you're receiving, or perhaps, you know, the weight that you've got. I know it must be so stressful when you are in that position and you're waiting for a referral to come through. If somebody's not well, it's not an easy time. But MCALs is available, and hopefully that might be able to give you a little bit of information about how to move along and get something done. I'm just having a quick look to see if I can find the number for you. 642 is the number, and if you go onto the government website and type in MCALs, you can find a link to send an email. A says, if our elderly relatives and retirees come from the UK to live with or near island families and require the next 30 years in healthcare and they've never paid NI here, that is a massive expense to our island working taxpayers to fund. How can we support this ongoing? That is from A. The construction industry slowdown, no sympathy from me, says text ending 148. They've had 15 years of boom and have got away with selling low quality overpriced houses for too long. Every Tom, Dick and Harry is a real estate entrepreneur. Slowing down, they should focus on building more affordable houses. That's all the texts and emails for the moment. So if you've got anything on your mind that you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. 166 177 studio@manxradio.com, or you can find us on WhatsApp 07624 166 177, or give us a call 66 13 68.
When the Mannin line's not on air, call Manx Radio to leave your opinion for broadcast on 682 631.
And we have 15 minutes or so before the end of this programme, so it'd be great to talk to you on air now. 66 13 68. John says, well said, Brian. Why should property owners have to pay full price if they go into a home when people who live in social housing don't have to pay anything at all? And it just reminded me that there was that consultation on how nursing, residential and home care should be paid for in the future. It was actually one of the Isle of Man government's most responded to consultations of all time. More than 1,200 people shared their thoughts, and it took almost a year to compile the results just because of the sheer number of people who took part. It was one of the top 10 highest responses received for a government consultation in recent years, and government says that is because it demonstrates how strongly many people feel about this. We've got a big article on this on the Manx Radio website. It was done in December, and it just gives the options that have arisen after that consultation, a couple of different models that are being considered for paying for care in the future. Let's go to the lines though now and join Elizabeth. Good afternoon, Elizabeth.
Oh, good afternoon, Beth. Nice to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you.
I have spoken already to Dr. Allison, and I also spoke to Andy about the problem associated with changing pension payments into banks.
Okay.
The situation, there really are three categories. There are those who do not have a bank account, and surprisingly enough, there are quite a few. Secondly, there are those who do have a bank account, but find it very, very difficult to get in to a bank. And of course, now, as we know, in the north, banks are closing, so that means a trip to Douglas, presumably. And then thirdly, there are those who are housebound. If they have relatives handy, they possibly would do the job for them. But there are lots who don't have relatives, and also over the years, it's been a sort of a certain way of getting pensions paid because a local neighbour or friend has authorization to go to the local post office and draw it on their behalf. Now, obviously, if that law is changed and they're going to have to go into Douglas or wherever it is, that's not going to work.
I think,
in fact, the more people who get on to you and talk about the situation, because it is absolutely full of holes from beginning to end. If you're happy with it already in the bank, fair enough, but it's going to be the same for everybody. As people get older, they won't want to travel into Douglas to get their money from the bank, will they?
I think that's a really important point to raise, Elizabeth. And when you're in that position, it must be quite stressful.
It's exceedingly stressful, and I have spoken to quite a few elderly people, and they really do not know how they are going to cope. It was ill-devised, it was thought through, brought in, and without any sort of conversations with the older people at all. And unfortunately, a lot of people now are really worried about the whole situation.
And you said you've spoken to the Treasury Minister. What response did you get?
Nothing. That's when he first brought it in. He just said, oh, well, that's it, sort of thing. But it was so badly framed, badly thought through. Well, it wasn't thought through at all. And now people are very concerned. I myself am 98, able-bodied, but I like using my local post office, and they're always so helpful. If I have to go to Douglas, that means a journey by bus into Ramsey and then on to Douglas and the same return. And it's just mind-boggling, and even then I have problems with sight. I'm at the eye clinic every 3 months. So even writing a cheque is not easy.
No, it sounds like there's a lot to contend with there, Elizabeth. Yes. And you're in a fortunate position insofar as you are completely able to go out there and still feeling that you want to do that as well.
Yes,
but as you say, for people who are housebound,
Yes, I just plead with people who are in this position to get onto the phone or get onto the minister and ask him to change his ideas. We have until the end of this year, and then it's obligatory.
OK, Elizabeth, thank you so much for raising this. This is something that we will pick up on and hopefully be able to speak to the Treasury Minister as well. But thank you so much for calling.
Right. Well, thanks for the call. Help. Bye-bye now.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
That was Elizabeth there. Let's go to line 2. Good afternoon, Tony.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Right, I'm fine. I just want to follow on from the lady who's just been speaking about the government and their drive to allow banks to close branches and force everybody to go to Douglas to do banking. Unless they want to do it online, of course, which the banks want, but no, not a lot of people don't want and can't. So my suggestion is, number one, change the law that a bank, if it wants to have a branch in the Isle of Man, must have 5 branches. If it wants to register in the Isle of Man, that's the banking licence, you need to have 5 branches.
But then, Tony, I'm just going to, sorry to jump in there, but, what if there isn't enough footfall to support 5 branches? Then you've got people who are working in those branches and, you get those accusations of a waste of money.
or you get the accusations that the banks just want to force people to go into internet banking. That's the other side of the coin that you're not referencing. People are being forced now. They've closed branches in Ramsey, and they continue to close branches in Ramsey. Very shortly, there'll be no banks open except one. And the problem here is that there's no control over it. They're the same thing, exactly the same thing, with pharmacies. All the same pharmacy, 5 licenses. How many pharmacies were there? 3. All the same. That problem was eventually fixed. It took 3 years, but it was eventually fixed. We've now got a separate independent pharmacy in Ramsey, plus the others. Now, my issue is, you can say to the banks, if you don't have 5 branches, then you're going to be in a position where we won't give you favourable status. Full stop. No arguments, no discussion. The other choice, which I keep on about, is turn the post office into banks. So that everybody, including older people and people who struggle, can go to the post office and do their banking. And neither one of those are that difficult.
Yeah, this idea of...
doesn't want to do that.
This idea of having the hubs, I think, has seemed to be a really popular one. I think people like the idea of that they can do everything that they might need to do in their local area in the same place. I mean, that does seem like it would be quite a good vision.
Well, yeah, it would. But the issue is the hubs at the moment are only in Douglas. So they need to be in locations outside of Douglas, because that's where most of the people are struggling. If you live in Douglas, you've got a choice of banks.
We've just had
outside of Douglas, you haven't.
We've had a message in from Dave who says, talking about banks, and if you started saying you have to have 5 branches, these are commercial decisions for the banks to make. If government imposed such banking licence restrictions, you'd have no banks.
I disagree, completely disagree. What you'd get is more competition. And if they don't want to do that, they'll go somewhere else, won't they? But I don't think all the banks will leave the Isle of Man. We have better banking situations than most other jurisdictions.
But they might not see being forced to open 5 branches if they didn't feel there was a commercial need for it as being a competitive thing.
But it is competitive. The banks are not losing money, they're making money. The point is that the government is not here to defend the banks. It's there to defend the rights and the needs for the citizens. So if the bank decides that, if we have 5 branches, we're going to have to increase our interest rates, well, surprise, surprise, they do that anyway. You think about how many banks are on the Isle of Man. There are dozens and dozens and dozens. Not just the big 4, there's dozens of them. And if you start asking the banks to open more branches, you'll have shock and horror, because they say, well, we haven't got the footfall. But the answer is they do have the footfall, they just don't want the branches, because they want to force people to use internet banking.
But then again, Tony, some people want to use internet banking. I mean, it was really interesting hearing from Elizabeth, and I think there was a very good argument for older people who may struggle to get out and about a little bit more. But younger people are pretty au fait with using internet banking, and in fact no other way really. They don't particularly like going and doing the face-to-face things sometimes.
I understand that, and for that they can internet bank. It's not an issue. I'm talking about the large slice of the population that doesn't want to internet bank and wants to have a bank they can go to and do their business. We are getting ignored.
All right, Tony.
That's discrimination by the banks as far as I'm concerned. So their solution, if they don't like doing that, they need to support putting branch hubs in every post office, at least 1 day a week.
All right, Tony. Thank you so much. Take care.
You're welcome. Take care.
Speak to you soon. That was Tony. So what do you reckon? Maybe having post offices turned into banks. A message here from 226. I just want to say I have hearing aids under the NHS and I find the audiology department is fantastic. I can drop them an email. They'll post out new batteries and tubes. I also asked a question this week whether I needed to go to my doctor to get a referral for a further hearing test. They immediately replied they've sent me an appointment for the beginning of April. So as far as I'm concerned, Manx Care is working well in this department. I've also had no issues ever contacting and getting an appointment at my doctor's surgery at Hale Selwood Court. I just wanted to share these positive views. And you know what? We love hearing the positive views as well. Text running 975 agrees with Brian on all accounts. But we can go to the lines now and join Chris Robertshaw. Good afternoon, Chris.
Hi, Beth. Hi. Just a quick word about my card. I mean, I'm speaking as the minister who was very much involved in introducing the My Card in the first place and the importance that it held at that time. And I'm really saddened that it's being withdrawn. I think, is it December 25 or something? Because I think the decision has been made on a very, at least from where I stand, a very narrow basis of budgetary review of how much the My Card actually costs, without really looking much more deeply and strategically at what future role could something like a My Card hold for those who need it. And I haven't really heard a strong argument as to why its removal is a good thing for those who haven't got bank accounts, for those I'm talking about older people and people on the periphery of the issues, and that's showing a disdain, a disinterest in all those people. And I just wanted to express my huge disappointment. I think there was a future for My Card. It could have expanded and developed along with certain crucial key post offices, and I think we're just throwing it all away, and I think it's very sad.
Let's just remind people what the My Card system is. These cards allow people to collect their benefits or pension in cash at Isle of Man post office branches. And I understand, Chris, though, when they announced the news that this was going to be withdrawn from the end of this year, they said fewer than 3,000 benefit and pensions recipients were now collecting in cash. So government does say it's uneconomical to keep up with this declining trend. And I wonder if this just goes back some way to the conversation I was having with Brian a little bit earlier. Yeah. When we're talking about cutting costs, unpopular decisions are going to be made. So in some ways, it does feel that sometimes government can't do right for doing wrong.
Well, you're doing a great job defending government today, Beth. Well done. But,
I'm just putting the opposite side, to be fair. I mean, I think I do hear what you're saying, but, you know, can you argue with the fact that it's a declining trend? I don't know. Would you have kept it going?
If I'd have been in post, I would have reviewed it in the point of view of what more could the My Card provide in the future, or what something like the My Card could provide that isn't necessarily available and isn't being provided by the bank's removal. The whole, I bank online, it's routine for me and most people, but there is another world, and there is the whole issue, for example, in a strategic sense of making sure that the concept of cash doesn't disappear entirely. And, there isn't the time to discuss that. And how society might deal in the absence of cash if the digital systems crashed for any reason. I mean, life would stop overnight. So I don't think we've had that big discussion. And I think to narrow it down to just the cost of the My Card, absent all the other issues that need to be considered in a strategic sense, is a serious mistake. And coming to your point about your admirable defence of government about making difficult decisions, they don't want to make decisions narrowly in close focus on a particular budget without understanding the greater implications that may occur from doing something like this. And there's no evidence at all that they're doing the latter. They're doing the former. Oh, that's a saving, we'll cut that out, without fully understanding the implications of what they're doing.
I would just say, though, Chris, I mean, you've clearly been in the position as an MHK, as a minister, where you've had to make unpopular decisions. And I wonder how that feels from a personal point of view, when you know you're doing something that the public's not going to like.
If I did something that the public didn't like, I mean, for example, means testing child benefit, which was incredibly difficult, I made really difficult decisions, but there was always arguments, thoroughgoing strategic arguments behind it. I mean, for example, taking the means testing of child benefit, my intention was always that a lot more money be fed back into nursery care, and the other members of government didn't allow that to happen. So the purpose of doing that in the first place was lost. So, but coming back to the MyCard issue, there hasn't been a strategic discussion about explaining beyond, it's a purely budgetary matter, as to where they're going and why. I've heard no argument at all. It's just a government looking for quick savings and not looking at the bigger picture, Beth. So, make big and difficult decisions when you've got a really good strategic argument behind it. In the instance of the MyCard, there isn't.
All right, Chris, really appreciate you taking the time to call in.
Nice to talk to you, Beth.
Take care. Thank you very much indeed. That was Chris Robertshaw talking about the MyCard withdrawal, which is happening towards the end of this year. Treasury says it will save £500,000 a year. But is that something that you really want to see happening? I should say we've had a lot of texts and emails in the past sort of 5 minutes or so. I will read through every single one of them. Jewin says, can people who have pensions paid into banks use cash points? If the doctor's strike does go ahead next week, wouldn't it be nice if some of the public would go up to the hospital and give those doctors some support? That is from Viv C. Older people who have sight and issues writing cheques and contactless tap and pay bank cards, surely tapping a card is ideal for them, so they have no need to go to a bank to get cash. And we have too many politicians for a population of 80,000 but not enough banks. The caller Tony says there are dozens and dozens of banks, so more than the number of politicians. Is this contradictory? As I say, lots more texts and emails. Thank you very much to text ending 376. I love having a bank. I'm sure you do. Andy will be back on the programme on Monday. As ever, if you think of something when you're not listening to the Mannin Line live on air, you can always leave a message on our out-of-hours number 682 631. I'll be back with update at 5. Christy D is coming up next. Whatever you're doing this afternoon, have a good one.